You think you know what gravity is. Of course you do. They taught you in school. You've felt it every morning when your feet touch the floor. You've seen it every time something slips from your hands. Gravity is that invisible force that keeps you pinned to the earth. That's what you believe. That's what almost everyone believes. And there's something deeply comforting in that certainty, isn't there? Gravity is one of the few things in life nobody argues about. There's no political debate over gravity. There are no opposing philosophical schools fighting over its cause. Gravity simply is. Gravity simply works. Gravity simply presses down on you day after day with a faithfulness no human being has ever managed to match. But here is where the problem begins. Because that image you carry in your head, that force pulling downward, oppressing, anchoring you to the ground, that is not gravity. It is a metaphor. It is a story humanity told itself for centuries just to keep functioning. And Maslow, Abraham Maslow, the psychologist who drew the pyramid you also think you know, discovered, without realizing it, the other face of that same story, the face nobody ever taught you. You think gravity is something that happens to you, something external, something that acts on you from outside, and exactly that is the first problem. That is wrong, not slightly wrong, not imprecise in some technical detail that only matters to physicists. It is fundamentally, structurally, dangerously wrong, and that error is not a minor mistake of scientific understanding. It is an error about how you understand yourself in relation to the universe. It is an error that affects the way you live, the way you feel the weight of your body, the weight of your decisions, the weight of your years. You have spent your entire life believing gravity crushes you, and that belief has made you live as though you were a victim of the forces surrounding you, as though the natural direction of the universe were downward, as though falling were the opposite of rising, as though weight were the opposite of freedom. It is not, and in the next few minutes, I am going to show you why. Before we continue, and what comes next is going to change the way you see gravity, yourself, and the universe forever. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, do it now. And if this kind of conversation makes you think leave your like, it is the signal that we are on the right path. Now, let us go. I want you to do something with me. You do not need to stand up. You do not need to prepare anything special. You only need to be exactly where you are. Look around and find something small, a key, a cup, a book, a pen, any object within reach. Pick it up, feel it. Notice its weight, that pressure it exerts on your palm, that small resistance telling you the object exists, that it has mass, that it occupies a place in the world. Now let it go. Watch what happens. The object falls. It descends. It strikes the nearest surface and stops. It seems simple, it seems so obvious it almost feels embarrassing to talk about it. But I want you to stay in that image a moment longer. Before the object fell, while you held it in your hand, something kept it in the air. That something was you, your body, your muscles, your will. And in the moment you stopped intervening, the object was not pushed downward by any invisible hand. No force seized it and dragged it. Or at least, that is what the deepest physics has to tell you. The object simply followed the most natural path available in the space surrounding it. Now here is the question I want to leave open, the question this experiment plants like a seed in your mind. What did you actually see? Did you see a force, or did you see a movement? Did you see something coming from outside or something arising from within the very structure of space itself? Because if what you saw was a force pulling downward, you are seeing what Newton saw. If what you saw was an object following the natural geometry of its surroundings, you are seeing what Einstein saw. And between those two visions, there is a distance that cannot be measured in meters. It is measured in what it means to be human in a universe like this one. Hold on to that experiment. We are coming back to it. The first great crack in the story you were told about gravity comes from the least expected place. Not from a laboratory. Not from an equation on a blackboard. It comes from a question Isaac Newton could never answer. Newton described gravity with a mathematical precision that still leaves us breathless today. He formulated a law that allowed us to predict the motion of planets, calculate the trajectory of projectiles, understand the tides, a law of universal reach, the law of universal gravitation, which in simple terms says that two bodies with mass attract each other with a force proportional to the product of their masses, and inversely proportional to the square of the distance separating them. It was a perfect equation. It worked. It worked so well that for more than 2 centuries nobody seriously questioned it. But Newton knew something that is not always mentioned. Newton knew his equation described how gravity behaves, but it did not explain what gravity is. He could not tell you what that force actually was. He could not tell you how it is possible that two objects separated by the vacuum of space attract each other, without anything between them to transmit that attraction. He called it action at a distance, and admitted in his private letters that it struck him as something absurd, something no serious philosophical mind should accept without a deeper explanation. Newton described the phenomenon, but he could never touch it. So what is gravity, truly? The answer arrived more than 2 centuries later, and it arrived in the most disturbing way possible. Gravity is not a force. Gravity is not a force. Say that to yourself for a moment, because what you just heard contradicts everything you were taught. Albert Einstein, in his theory of general relativity, completed in the year 1915, showed that what Newton called gravitational force is in reality the curvature of space-time. There is no invisible hand pulling objects downward. What exists is a space that curves around any object possessing mass, and other objects simply follow the curvature of that space. Like a marble rolling across a stretched sheet on which someone has placed a heavy object at the center. The marble is not attracted by any magical force toward the central object. The marble simply follows the shape the object gave to the sheet. And now, the new question arising from this revelation is more unsettling than the previous one. If gravity is not a force coming from outside, if gravity is the shape space takes around mass, then what are you in that space? A victim of an external force, or the center of a geometry you yourself generate? To understand why humanity took so long to see this, you need to go much further back. You need to go all the way to Aristotle. Aristotle, who lived in the 4th century before our era, had a theory about falling objects. He did not speak of forces or gravitational fields. He spoke of natural places. According to Aristotle, every element in the universe has a place to which it naturally belongs. Earth belongs below. Fire belongs above. And when an earthen object falls, it is not being pushed by any external force. It is simply returning to its place. It is going back to where it belongs. This idea seems outdated, even naive. But listen to it again, carefully, because it contains something Newton does not have, something even Einstein expressed in a different register. The idea that movement is not always the result of an external force, but of an internal belonging. An object does not fall because something pushes it. It falls because that is its place in the order of things. For more than 1,000 years, this Aristotelian vision dominated European and Arab thought, and it was not foolish. It was deeply coherent with a vision of the universe where everything has its place, where order is not mechanical, but teleological, where the universe is not a machine, but a living organism organizing itself toward its own good. When Nicholas Copernicus and later Johannes Kepler began showing that planets move around the sun, following not perfect circles but ellipses, the Aristotelian vision began to crack. And when Newton arrived with his celestial mechanics and his law of universal gravitation, it seemed at last that the question was answered. Gravity is a force. The universe is a machine. Order is mathematical. Aristotle's natural place was left in the dustbin of history. But then Maslow arrived, and he arrived from a completely different direction. Abraham Maslow was not thinking about gravity when he designed his hierarchy of needs in the year 1943. He was thinking about human beings. He was observing that human beings have needs that organize themselves in layers, that certain needs must be satisfied before others can emerge, that there is a kind of internal order to human flourishing. Physiological needs first, then safety, then love and belonging, then esteem, and finally, at the peak of the pyramid, what Maslow called self-actualization. Now, what does any of this have to do with gravity? Everything. Because what Maslow was describing, without using the language of physics, is exactly the same structure Einstein described in the cosmos. Each level of Maslow's hierarchy is like a layer of curvature in human space. When a basic need is not satisfied, the entire human system curves toward that need. Not as the result of an external force pushing you, as the result of the internal geometry of what you are. You are hungry, and your whole world curves toward food, not because something forces you, but because that is the shape your interior space takes in that moment. And self-actualization, that peak Maslow barely had time to describe before he died, is not the result of having escaped gravity. It is the result of having found your own center of gravity, the point around which everything else in your life organizes itself coherently. Here is the paradox. Here is the place where reason alone does not reach. If gravity is not a force but a curvature of space, then no object in the universe is being crushed by anything. Planets do not orbit the sun because the sun pulls them. Planets follow the geometry the sun created in space. And when a planet traces its orbit, from inside that orbit it feels no force. It is in constant free fall. It is following the straightest possible line available in a curved space, and that straightest possible line is an ellipse. Think about that. The Earth is falling toward the sun right now. You are falling toward the sun right now. You do not feel it because you are in perfect free fall, and perfect free fall from the inside is indistinguishable from flight. Here reason stops. Because if falling freely feels like flying, then everything you thought you knew about up and down, about weight and lightness, about oppression and freedom, is built on an illusion. The sensation of weight you feel right now, sitting where you are, is not the universe crushing you. It is the floor pushing you upward, preventing you from falling freely toward the center of the earth. The weight you feel is not gravity. It is resistance to gravity. This has no simple answer. Not Simone Weil, who dedicated some of the most beautiful pages in modern philosophy to thinking about what she called gravity and grace. Not David Bohm with his implicate order. Not Einstein with all the elegance of his geometry. None of them fully dissolves the mystery. Because the mystery is not mathematical. The mystery is this: if the universe does not crush, if the universe curves, if the universe invites you to follow its deepest geometry, why does living feel so heavy? I want to pause here, because what I just said is not something that gets processed quickly, and I am wondering where you are right now as you listen to this. Are you at home, on public transport, walking somewhere, lying down staring at the ceiling, thinking about questions with no easy answers? Tell me in the comments where you are joining us from today. I like to imagine the places from which this conversation arrives. And if something we have been discussing resonated with you in a particular way, tell me that too. I am listening. Good. Let us continue. What changes in your daily life when you absorb this revelation is not abstract. It is not a philosophical shift that floats in the mind without ever touching the body. It is a change in how you experience weight. And weight, in human life, is not only physical. Think about the last time you felt crushed by a responsibility you could not carry, by a relationship that demanded more than you had, by a decision you did not want to make but knew you had to. In that moment, you probably experienced the weight as an external force, something coming from outside and pressing down on you, something you did not choose and could not control. And from that experience, the natural response is to resist, or to escape, or to collapse beneath the weight. But if weight is not a force coming from outside, if weight is the shape your interior space takes around what matters most, then the question changes completely. It is no longer how to escape the weight. It is where the weight is pointing, because weight always points toward the center. And the center in the physical cosmos is where the greatest concentration of mass, of energy, of meaning is found. And in your life, when you feel the weight of an important decision, that weight is not arbitrary. That weight is telling you that what stands before you matters, that something in that direction has gravitational mass in your interior universe, something that curves your space, something toward which, if you stopped resisting, you would move naturally the way planets follow the sun. Maslow saw it from psychology. Unsatisfied needs are not burdens fate crushes you with. They are centers of gravity that organize your world until they find satisfaction. Hunger is not a punishment. It is a center of gravity curving your entire space toward food. Loneliness is not a flaw. It is a center of gravity curving your entire space toward connection. And self-actualization, that highest level Maslow barely managed to describe, is not the elimination of all centers of gravity. It is the discovery of the fundamental center of gravity, the one that organizes all the others. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that when you feel resistance in your life, when something feels heavy in a way you cannot explain rationally, the answer is not to add more force in the opposite direction. The answer is to ask yourself where this weight is pointing. What has gravitational mass for me in this moment? What is this interior space of mine curving toward its center? Simone Weil, in her philosophical notebooks, wrote something that became famous for its density. She wrote that gravity causes every being to fall. Only grace can cause something to rise. And for decades that thought was read as a theological statement, a separation between the heavy material and the light spiritual. But if you read it through Einstein's eyes, if you read it knowing that gravity is not a force of oppression, but the geometry of curved space, then grace is not a force opposed to gravity. Grace is the movement that follows the deepest geometry of space. Grace is perfect free fall. Grace is orbiting your own center without resistance, and that changes everything. Because then freedom is not escaping gravity. Freedom is finding your center of gravity and following it without resistance, the way a planet does not fight its orbit, but inhabits it with perfect precision. There are people who spend their entire lives resisting their center of gravity, resisting what curves them, resisting what matters to them, because they were taught that weight is the enemy. They were taught that what matters costs, and that costing is bad. And so they dedicate extraordinary energy to staying away from the center, to floating on the surface, to not falling. But falling, as you now know, is not the problem. The problem is not knowing where you are falling toward. Now go back to that room, go back to the object you held in your hand, and let fall. You watched it fall and thought it fell because a force was pulling it downward. But now you know there was no force. There was a geometry. The object simply followed the deepest curvature of the space surrounding it. It followed the straightest path available in a curved space. And that straightest available path brought it to the floor. Not because the floor is the final destination of all things. Not because down is the place of the heavy and the worthless. The floor was simply there, in the path of that particular geometry, in that particular moment. If the object had possessed enough lateral velocity, it would have orbited the Earth instead of falling. If it had been the sun, it would have curved space rather than following its curvature. The object's destination was not written in its nature as a heavy thing. It was written in the relationship between its mass, its velocity, and the geometry of the space surrounding it. You too, you are not a falling object. You are a system of mass, velocity, and geometry in constant relationship with the space surrounding you. There is no external force pulling you downward. There is an interior center of gravity that curves your space, and everything in your life, every decision, every relationship, every weight you feel, is the result of the geometry that center has created. Maslow's pyramid is not a staircase you climb through effort. It is a gravitational map of the human being. Basic needs are the most massive centers of gravity, the ones that curve space with the greatest intensity when they go unsatisfied. And self-actualization at the peak is not victory over gravity. It is the moment when your own being becomes the most significant center of gravity in your universe. The moment when you no longer follow the geometry of external needs, but the geometry of what you are in your fullest form. That is what Maslow exposed without knowing it. That gravity is not the enemy of human growth. Gravity is its deepest structure. And the great lie, the lie you were told, was not that gravity exists. The lie was that gravity crushes you. The truth is that gravity calls you. It calls you back to your center. It calls you back to what matters. It calls you, with the perfect patience of the laws of the cosmos, to follow the deepest geometry of what you are. The object fell. And in that falling, if you knew how to see it, there was no oppression. There was belonging. If this episode touched something in you, if something here resonated, unsettled you, or simply made you think in a way you did not expect, subscribe to the channel if you have not done so yet and leave your like. It is the simplest way of saying that this kind of conversation is worth having. Until the next episode.